How would you respond if God answered you in a whirlwind? It's easy enough to have questions for God when you don't have to ask him face to face. Well, this interaction appropriately humbles Job, and he admits, I uttered what I did not understand, things too wonderful for me, which I did not know. Therefore, I despise myself, and I repent in dust and ashes. I'm in no position, Job says, or effectively says, to judge how you run the universe. And from now on, I will simply trust that you will always do right, even when I don't understand it. You see, Job is never told what happens in chapters 1 and 2. Well, with that, God is done talking to Job. And his final word, actually, in the book is not to Job, but to Eliphaz. Isn't that funny? Look what God says to one of Job's friends. So, after the Lord had spoken these words to Job, the Lord said to Eliphaz, my anger burns against you and your two friends, for you have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has. Job, he has spoken of me what is right, but man, how could that be? Because Job said some pretty sketchy stuff. God, he destroys the wicked with the blameless, and he mocks at the calamity of the innocent. So surely everything that came out of Job's mouth can't be right. It seems as if what God is doing is he's approving of the posture of Job. He's always leaning in and desiring to talk with God. As the conversations progressed throughout these dialogues, Job talked less and less to his friends, and he talked more and more to God himself. And that is a model that God approves of. Well, God is going to continue speaking to Eliphaz. Look what he says now in verse 8. Therefore, he says, take 7 bulls and rams and go to my servant Job and offer up a burnt offering for yourself. He will do that. Job will pray for you, and I will accept his prayer and not deal with you according to your folly. Now think about this, you guys. Because God's servant suffered innocently, he is qualified to intercede for and provide atonement for the nations. Isn't that incredible? I mean, isn't that what the book of Job is teaching? Why else include this paragraph about Job's intercession for his friends? Job, you see, is a type of Christ. Isn't that amazing? He's an innocent, suffering servant. He's called a servant 6 times in this book. And who else in the Hebrew Bible is called my servant by God? It's a pretty short list. We got Abraham, Moses, David, the big 3, a couple others. And you will recognize from the book of Isaiah, the Messiah, the suffering servant. Look at Isaiah 53. My servant. I'm going to get out of Job here. Behold, my servant will act wisely. Think about Job as part of the wisdom literature. He will be despised and rejected by man, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. Now tell me, is Job a man acquainted with grief? Surely. Here it says that he's borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. The Messiah has. He was pierced for our transgressions, crushed for our iniquities, and upon him was the chastisement that brought us peace, and the Lord laid on him the iniquity of us all. So here we are in the book of Job. A Gentile is filling out the portrait of the sufferings of our Jewish Messiah and his intercession for the Gentiles. I mean, isn't this incredible? What a book. Well, this intercession of Job is highlighted all the more when you contrast it with the narrative of Eli the prophet in 1 Samuel 1 to 4. Now, what's the connection here between Job and Eli? Take a look at this chart. Nothing like a good chart if you want to show some parallels. So, what is that random story doing at the beginning of Job, right? Where we said it was Job's blamelessness is depicted because when his sons and daughters would throw birthday parties for themselves, Job would get nervous. Maybe my children sinned, and he'd offer a burnt offering, saying it could be that they cursed God in their hearts. A lot of curious details there, and it seems like they map onto the story of Eli, whose sons were very wicked and stole God's offering and blasphemed God with their actions. And when Eli tried to stop them and confront them, he's going to ask this question. If someone sins against man, God will mediate for him. But what if someone sins against the Lord? Man, who can intercede? Who can palal for him? Look at now the end of the book of Job. Now, Job's friends, they certainly sinned against the Lord, right? You have not spoken of me what is right, God tells Eliphaz. But then Eli's question is answered. Who can intercede? Who can palal? My servant Job can palal for you. One more connection. Eli's sons are going to die when a party of Philistines comes and defeats Israel. And then a messenger is going to come to Eli and tell him, and this messenger is going to tear his clothes and put dirt on his head. Now look at how those details are present in the first two chapters of Job. Job's children, his sons, are killed, and a messenger comes to Job to tell him about the attack of invading army. And then when Job's friends arrive, they tear their clothes and sprinkle dust on their heads. Now, what's the point? Why this deliberate linking between Job and Eli? Well, the failure of the priesthood of Eli, it resulted in the death of his sons and the exile of the ark. You remember that in 1 Samuel 4, the ark is carried off by the Philistines. In contrast to that, Job, he's going to experience the covenant curses of exile on himself, though he's without sin, and he will be able to intercede where Eli was not. Now, this phrase, Job the exile, that should get your brains firing. Where in the Hebrew Bible is the book of Job located? The Ketuvim. And what is the general purpose of the Ketuvim? It is to address questions raised by the exile. Now, how would the book of Job give comfort and provide hope to a faithful Jew living in Babylon? Someone like Daniel or Nebuchadnezzar, those guys are pretty good dudes. And so was Job. You see, Job is presented as a righteous exile who suffered the covenant curses of the Torah for no sin of his own. Take a look at how the sufferings of Job are mapped onto the book of Deuteronomy. Look at this. Just give you one example. We need to go to the beginning of Job now. Job 2. Job 2:7. Compare this to Deuteronomy 28:35. Okay, we got to see these babies side by side. So Job went out from the presence of the Lord, Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and struck Job with loathsome sores. The Lord will strike you, same verb, with grievous boils. And this is the same word in the Hebrew for loathsome sores is the same as grievous boils. And these boils, these sores will be from the sole of your foot to the crown of your head. And what happened to Job? He had these sores, these boils from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. Now, not only, so someone like Daniel who's reading the book of Job, he's like, man, I can relate to this guy. Both of us are innocent sufferers. But does suffering have the last word in the book of Job? No, it does not. Let's look at verse 10. All right, Job 42:10. Got to go to the end. So the Lord restored the fortunes of Job, and he gave Job twice as much as he had before. He blessed the latter days of Job more than his beginning. He had 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camels, 1,000 oxen, and 1,000 donkeys. You see, both Job's suffering and his restoration are mapped onto Israel's exile and her promise of return and restoration from exile. Notice how the language of Job's restoration is the same as the language of Israel's restoration. Check this out. One more chart for you. So here we are, Job. He is our righteous exile who experienced the covenant curses and the restoration promised by the prophets. Now, this word comfort, naham, it is key in the book of Isaiah, announcing the coming restoration. And it also, the same word, will initiate Job's own restoration. And this restoration, it was a double restoration, wasn't it? The Lord gave Job twice as much as he had before. He had 7,000 sheep, now he has 14,000. He had 3,000 camels, now he has 6,000 camels. And this, in a way, reverses the double punishment of Israel for her sins. She received double from the hands of the Lord. If you look at Zechariah 9, the same passage which talks about the king coming on a donkey, return to your stronghold, or prisoners of hope. I declare that I will restore to you double. And then the phrase that kind of summarizes Job's restoration, the Lord restored the fortunes of Job. And this phrase, restored the fortunes, it shows up 28 times in the Hebrew Bible. And every single time it is talking about Israel being returned from their captivity or being rescued from attack. And only once, only in Job 42:10 does it refer to an individual, a single person. And that is because this individual represents the nation of Israel and her king, who likewise would suffer without any sin and therefore be qualified to intercede and to provide atonement for the nations.